Hi, I'm Georgina Lewis with the So Long with Georgie Girl. And tonight we're going to be talking about the Cathedral Windows quilt using Tula pink fabric, where you're specifically using the Zuma fabric. And then also in the second half of the hour, we're going to talk about the Mediterranean tile quilt featuring K facets, artisan and great batiks that came out. So one of the things I was sharing earlier is my passion for using some of these great edgy fabrics and that are very modern by modern designers, and yet pulling them into traditional quilts and bringing those traditional quilts to life, and not maybe being, you know, cutting edge and too funky, but helping the mature woman learn how to use some of these fabrics and, you know, not be too scared from them, because they are, some of them are, you know, very new and very edgy. So with that thought process, and if we stay true to that, we're going to have a lot of fun this year in 2019 doing some of these quilts. So the first quilt we're going to talk about is the Cathedral Window quilt. Now, interestingly enough, Jan, Dan, and I, we spent about hours and hours looking at over hundreds of different patterns for the Cathedral Windows quilt. And I mean, I went to the extent of looking at magazines from 2014 that have been archived, buying issues electronically of them and reading some of these patterns just to find a pattern that's easy. And I think that's the challenge here, is how easy can we make it? And we've made it pretty easy. I think when you realize what we've done and what pattern we found that we're going to modify for our sew along, you're going to be really happy and probably making a lot of these. And I've got some prep work here on the board that I did for our session tonight, and I repeated it at, you know, of course, at 8 o'clock. But let's start with breaking down what the pattern is, how we're going to use it, and the step-by-step process. So the pattern is on the Facebook wall, So Long with Georgie Girl. I just put it up. It's a free pattern on a pillow at Blueprint. And Angela has the pattern that she goes through, written pattern and a video. And I'm not going to recap that whole thing because you can go get that for free and watch it. It's a great video and it's very well done. But we're going to take that pattern and we're going to modify it into a quilt format. Then we're going to take it and we're going to add batting and a backing to it, and we're going to make just a few tweaks to it so it makes a beautiful queen size quilt. If you need other measurements or you want Jan and I to work out a different size, just PM me on the wall and we'll come up with a math for you. Okay, so let me show you. I've done a sample board of the pattern, and of course I'm using K facet fabric, the new fabric called Fall 2018, which just came out in spring of 2019. Now, this is super easy. This pattern is not hand sewn, it's machine stitched. So that's good, right? That makes that a lot easier. Now I've got a larger example. I'm using 10 by 10 squares. And one thing you'll learn about doing the Cathedral Window quilt is that the glass in the middle, and all of the squares are always the same size. So that makes it super easy. In this example, I'm doing a 10-inch, but in the quilt itself, we're going to be doing 6-inch squares. In the video, they have 4-inch squares. So that's what's your choice as to what size you want to use in this exercise. Okay, now, when you look at this, this is super easy. We're going to take this triangle, and I'm going to break it down and explain more in a second, but just bear with me. This triangle here gets folded over once, and you could do twice if you want a bigger scoop on it. And then you're going to top stitch this down. Now, the cool thing about this is we're going to come back later and we're going to put a fun matching stitch in a scoop here. Now let me show you. I'm going to grab another fat quarter. I had a couple of these laying around. So can you see that stitch? Isn't that pretty? Where that fold is going to be. So when that fold is white on white, and we're going to top stitch that later in the next week when we go to quilt it with a fun color, and we're going to stitch through the batting and the backing, and the backing is going to be the really cool new Tula pink Tinkerbell backing, which is looks like splattered water, and it has this marble effect. Super cool. All right, but right now let's talk about these fabrics. Last week when we did the intro and the kickoff to this series, I told you about a fabric that we're using, which is the Shell White on White by Timeless Treasures. They got a lot of questions on the Facebook wall about that fabric. There are a lot of layers to the Catherdral windows quilt, and people are having a hard time finding enough of that fabric. So you can do two things. If you want, which would be perfectly okay, if you get that fabric and you found it, save some of it for the pillows that we're making. We're going to be making these really neat complementary hexy octagon type pillows, shams to match. You'll see those in a couple weeks. It's super easy. We made a hexy pillow sham easy. Believe it or not, no hand sewing. You're going to be making the hexies and sewing them on top of the pillow, on top of the pillow sham. And it's going to create a cool effect, and it's going to complement this very well. So use your extra fabric for that, because you don't need it for the fold. So this folded layer, which I'm going to break this down in a minute and show you the layers underneath, you can use a complementary fabric to go with the background. I would use back here in the background fabric, I would use the Shell, because when this folds away, that is exposed, and that's the pretty part of this Cathedral quilt. Okay, so on this folded piece right here, again, just for the TV, I'm gonna put this under here so you can see it real well. This folded piece here, you're gonna top stitch this in a thread that matches the stitch, so it looks invisible almost when you're stitching that down. And this can be one of two different fabrics. One, it could be the Arctic White, which is white on white, it's very white. Or you can go with an off-white, and this is called Mist. And this Mist fabric is by Free Spirit. Both of those are by Free Spirit. And it complements that other Shell fabric really well. So either one, you can use either one. It's just a slight variation. It's a white on white fabric, so it has both color tones in the base fabric. So it's just your preference. This Mist color, which is slightly off-white, goes really well with the backing that we're getting, that I'm going to be showing you when it comes in just a few weeks from Tinkerbell. So I would go with this off-white. Okay, so let's break this down. If I take off the stained glass piece of this, what you're going to have underneath, bear with me, I'm taking it off. I have it all pinned. What you have underneath here are triangles, and Angela's video shows this to you really well. Okay, so you have this layer, which is a triangle. So this is folded in half and pressed. Everything needs to be pressed to do this well. And so this actually becomes two layers because it's folded. Then you have the back panel, so that's 3, and then the stained glass on top, which is 4. So you have 4 layers to this quilt. You have 2 pieces of fabric, the back panel, which should be the shell, and then the folded complementary curved part of the window. So this fabric is the solid. This does not have, you don't have to pay to have the fancy pattern on it. But knowing that this is folded in half, it's a double layer, so you're going to need double amount of fabric, okay? if you're doing a queen size quilt, which is what we're going to be talking about, and if you're going to use the Zuma Aurora quilt kit by Tula, then you're going to come with, it comes with 24 fat quarters. We're going to pull 2 of them out. There's 2 whites in there. You're going to pull them out. You don't need those for this piece of the project because you don't want white on white on white. You want some color pop. So those brings it down to 22. So 22 fat quarters. Those are 18 by 22 inch. So we're going to be cutting 6-inch squares because, again, I want to make it easy. So I'm going to have a lot of 6-inch squares so it goes pretty quickly for you. And that means you'll get 9 out of each fat quarter, 3 by 3, right? So 6 inches, 6, 12, 18, 6, 12, 18, and then you'll get 9 squares out of it. Well, there's 198 squares that you're going to get total. And then you only really need, if you do 13 rows by 15 rows, you're only going to need something like 195 squares. So that works out perfectly. And that will be the color to the glass inside the window frame. So now you got to buy this other fabric. And 4 yards of the shell on shell is for this back panel piece here. This piece here, you're going to need double that because it's folded in half. Okay, and this is a designer white. It's relatively inexpensive, but I would still get a high quality fabric when you're doing this project. Okay, so now you've got the layers and you understand how this is broken down. Let's set this aside and let's talk about cutting our fabrics. Let's talk about what comes in the kit and what you guys should do with that kit. So I'm going to take this board and set this aside. All righty. I saved some. I've been cutting all of these fat quarters all day. First, I want to give you a couple tips. And you should know this, but I'm going to go ahead and share the basics, so apologize. Number 1, press your fabrics. Press them all out. When you're doing this work, it's really important that you have a pressed piece of fabric. Now, this particular quilt is a little bit forgiving, where some of the other quilts we're doing, like the Tippy canoe, is the star pattern is not forgiving. You have to cut and you have to be very square. This is all going to be hidden inside those window panes. So we're pretty lucky that not only have we found an easy pattern to be making this quilt with, but because these 6 by 6s are going to be folded over, you can be a little forgiving with your cuts. Now, let's talk about our cuts. You want to find the selvage end. That's the long end, right? So a fat quarter is not a square, it's a rectangle. It's not 18 by 18. It's 18 by 22, hopefully. And then you want to take this and you want to fold it so that the selvage is on this end, right here. Okay? So long ways. And that's because we want to get our scrap out of here. We want a strip. If we do this correctly, we want to get a strip at the end left over of 4 inches here. And we're going to use this in the upcoming weeks to do a hexy pillow sham with this scrap. And that hexy pillow sham is going to be super easy, but you need these strips. So please make sure that you take your time and you think this through before you cut, because a couple very important things about this fabric is there is some directional fabric in here. Specifically, okay, we have fabric that has whales, and we have fabric that have seahorses in it. The other fabric that has, your jellyfish, you're going to be fine with. There are the little anchors, and you can, when you cut it, you can turn it any way you want. So those aren't the problems. The only one fabric you need to pay attention to when you cut is the seahorse, and that's up to you. That's if you want the seahorse in the middle. I didn't worry about it. I have the seahorse and the whales, they're upside down from each other. So I cut half of them with the whales up and half of them with the seahorses somewhere in the middle of my pane. Okay, so that's up to you. Okay, so let me show you how you're going to do this. You're going to put your selvage all the way here on the right end. Okay, and if you're using your very cool stripology ruler, which I just became a huge fan of a couple weeks ago when I took a clinic class workshop here in town. I loved it. You're going to lay this out. So I'm going to lay this out for you. And because this is a little bit forgiving, I'm not even wearing my reading glasses. I mean, that's how easy this is. I can see, so I'm even going to cut a straight line, but I don't have to worry about being precise because I'm going to lose, you know, some of that 6 inches in the fold anyway. So that's the beauty here. So what you're going to do is the first thing, you just make sure that this is long so that your extra will be down here at the end. And then if you have a stripology ruler, if not, just cut them in 6-inch strips. But the first thing we're going to do here together is we're going to cut at the 18. I like to go right to left. Then I do my 12. Then I do my 6. And then I do my 0. Okay, so close that blade. So the first thing, when I take off my stripology ruler, I've got my 4 inches left over, and I put that in a stack. These are going to go into a Ziploc, and they're going to be labeled pillow. All right, then I've got each one of my 6-inch sets. And then I have my scrap, which I will donate to someone on the cakewalk. Now, what I'm going to do is take these out and lay them flat. And obviously, I'm going to cut them the opposite way. Now, at the 8 o'clock show, I sat here and cut them all. And I think that's what killed all of the time. So I'm not going to cut them. I already have some pre-cut. I'm just going to lay them out and show you what I do. So I lay these out. I double, stack them on top of each other. The stripology ruler is wide enough that it will double cut these for me. And then I'm done. Voila, I have my 6 by 6 squares. Okay, now not all of these the other way at 18 inches are exact. So when I cut those, I do trim off the 18 and the 0 again and make them as close to perfect as I can, 6 by 6s. When I get done with that step, all right, the next thing I do is I stack all of the similar patterns together. Be careful, the waves have words in them, so you will want to pay attention to that if you care about directional fabric. I like to call this the water drops because it looks to me like water dropping down the boat, So this progression of color, these all have little anchors in them. And so you will want your anchors, if you care about direction, you want all your anchors to go the same way. So it's important to me to have them all directional and I have them all similar stacks. And I'll show you what I do and you can do what you would like. These are the seahorse ones and I have the whales up. So you want to separate your whales that are prominent versus your seahorses into 2 separate stacks, even though it's the same fabric. Now there's a lot here. Okay, so I'm going to put my seahorses, my jellyfish together, and I'm going to show you what I do. I call these the waves. You can nickname them whatever you want. No one will know. So I have 2 stacks. One is the seahorse, one are the whales. I keep them separate because they're different patterns to me. Even though the pattern is the same, when you flip them over, they're totally different. Okay, put all the waves together. Now, once I've separated my fabrics, and there's a lot more than just this, but I just want to show you an example. I'm going to turn this around so you can see this. I put all of my similar fabrics together in different stacks, okay? And I do this for a reason, because as I start to design my design wall, I want to equally distribute the same number of fabrics in each row and column on my wall. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm going to get it right off the first time I do that, you know, right out of the gate. But I want to really kind of focus on having an equal number of each colorway. So obviously I don't have all of my fabrics cut yet. I've been doing it for the 8 o'clock and the 10 o'clock show. I still have quite a few of these different colors to cut, not many. But when I start to get these cut, I lay them out on the board like you see behind me. And one of the key things that I do is I'll leave it on the board for a couple days. And as I walk past it, I change it up quite a bit. And I think this is probably a good representation of what I start to do when I put it up. I can clearly see by looking at what you see through the webinar that I've got two reds right here in a row together. And that kind of stands out, where I only have one yellow in this section. So I'm going to really play with that and make sure that I equally distribute all the colors, but I don't have them all cut yet. And I've got to do 13 by 15. So I have to have 13 colors by 15, so rows and columns. Okay, so I have 15 rows and I'm going to have 13 columns. So I definitely want to lay out at least the top half of this quilt. If I can lay out half of it, or even a third of it, which would be 5 rows, then I'll have 5, 10, 15. I could repeat my pattern. That will help me. That will help me a great deal. So I'm going to really sit back and distribute. I want to make sure a couple different things happen. Number one, no two similar colors touch. Like these two, even though they're both bold and they're both, you know, that hot pink family, they're not touching. There is a yellow and a blue, and the blues are not touching, but these two blues are. So I will probably change that up. I also did some progression on these water drips. So I call them water drips, right? So this is the lighter part of that quarter. This is the medium, and this one is the darker. So I have separated them going from light to medium to dark, and then I reversed it here, light, medium, and then I need to put a dark back up here at the top. So on different sides of the quilts, I will take these water drops and I will take the 3 progressions of color and I will separate them throughout my rows and columns. I also don't want 2 waves put together. I want them to be separated. I don't want the same patterns right next to them in different colorways. Well, you don't always know that when you first put it up on the wall. You're gonna really, how I do it is I start to look at color patterns first. I look at, do I have a yellow and a pink and a blue, and then a green and a blue and a teal, and I break out my colors. Then I start looking at patterns, because it's a little too overwhelming for me to try to do it all at the same time. I like to play with it a little bit. Do a little go fish, find the matches and separate them. And so I also like to put, believe it or not, I have to admit this, I like to put all my favorites over on my side of the quilt and my least favorites on my husband's side of the quilt, because he'll never know, but it's for me, I get to see all the fun ones I like on my side of the quilt. So, you know, breaking that apart, laying that out, playing with it, walking past it. When you think you've got it laid out the way you like it, I would encourage you to take a picture of it and flip it to black and white on your phone. And then you can see the color depth of these different squares, and are they all jumbled up in the same place, or have you broken them apart and spread them, evenly across rows and columns? So that's my other tip. So we've talked about fabrics in your layers for your cathedral, window pane and glass, right? We've talked about cutting tips and making sure you put all your extra salvage on one end. You get all of the long ends to the right on your cuts. And then we talked about matching up your patterns before you start to laying them on your design wall. So make sure you match the patterns up and get them all laid out with all the different colorways, and then start your design wall. And then the last tip is put the ones you don't like on your husband's side. So those are your tips to get started. Now, let's talk about homework, and let's talk about how to break down this quilt. The pattern that we gave you, which is that blueprint, is a 4" by 4" pattern, which you are welcome to do a 4". I think Missouri Star Quilts had one at 5 inches. Her quilt pattern, I feel, is a little bit harder than Angela's, because you have to be more seasoned to hold those layers together the way that she does it. And so the Angela version at Blueprint is super easy because it's got triangles. They're all sewed together to begin with. You're not dealing with a lot of pieces. They're fixed. So do that pattern. And her example is 4". But we felt like 6 inches would work well with our fat quarters. We got a good number of cuts out of it. We got a good remaining salvage of 4 inches that we can use for our pillow shams and our hexies, which will be our next project. But 6 inches equates to 13 columns by 15 rows of 6-inch window panes. And that will get you a queen size quilt. However, could you imagine sewing these panes together? And if you had, I'm going to bring this back up here for a second. Now, this is obviously a much larger diagram than what you're going to deal with your 6 inches. But could you imagine sewing this row plus 15 other rows? You'd be very frustrated by the time you got to row 7 and all that bulk underneath that sewing machine, right? So I'm going to suggest that you not do it that way. The way we're teaching this quilt is that we want you to do 5 rows together in one panel, so to speak. So you will fold and sew and make the window panes, okay, for 4 rows. And the 5th row here at the bottom, you will not do the stained glass on the inside, okay? You're gonna leave that undone, leave that 5th row on your board, and skip down to row 6. So the top of that row will look like this. In row 6, you'll leave the bottom of 5 undone and do row 6. That way you have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is a row. 4 panels makes a row, right? So this is the top and this is the bottom of your row. So you're going to do 4 rows of stained glass, folded over and sewed. That's your panel, your first panel. Leave the bottom of that undone. Skip row 5 and do 6, because later it's a lot easier just to do one painful row of sewing 5 together from panel 1 and panel 2, and then sewing row 10 together in panel 2 and panel 3. You only have to deal with that bulk of all of that stuff in 2 rows in this entire quilt. That makes it a lot easier on you. After you get this done, and after you sewed your 3 panels together, we're going to come back together before you put panel 1 and panel 2 together and before you put 2 and 3 together, and we're going to recap where you should be. Once you get done with that, then we're going to show you how to long arm quilt this panel with a fun stitch through the batting, through the backing, and quilt your entire quilt together in a quilt as you go concept, which makes it super easy, okay? So that's your homework, is to get all of your triangles cut, watch the video, print the pattern for the pillow. This is not the pillow we're going to use. We're going to do a different pillow for this quilt, but we want you to use that pattern, and instead of doing the 4-inch squares, we suggest you do 6-inch squares with your Zuma Azora quilt kit. So get your Zuma kit, cut it up into these 6-inch squares, and go ahead and start making your panels. You are going to love this quilt. It's super easy, and you're going to be able to stay on track with us. And I swear, it's like, for a beginner, this is going to be easy. It's a weekend project. So your project homework is to get all of those panels sewn, and you have 2 weeks to do it, because next week we are going to talk about the tote and continue with the Mediterranean. So I'm going to set this aside, okay?